Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of mechanical precision.
Right, a very clean answer.
Exactly. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, the doctor points to the fracture, and, the path forward is just established.
It's a comforting binary, broken or not broken. I mean, we really want pain to have a clear, identifiable source.
Yeah.
Something we can just point a finger at and declare, well, that is the enemy. That is a biological failure we need to fix.
But when you step into the landscape of historical radical spirituality and really extreme human endurance, that whole x-ray machine just shatters.
It's completely overexposed.
Because we're looking at a terrain of human suffering today where biology and anatomy are suddenly overshadowed by the extreme architecture of the human soul. Welcome to the deep dive.
We're glad you're here.
We are exploring a profoundly challenging set of historical documents today. These are excerpts from the 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th letters of a man named Lawrence.
And these were written right at the absolute end of his life, between November of 1690 and February of 1691.
The context of these letters is, it's pretty crucial to understanding just how radical this text is. He's writing to unnamed individuals who are suffering from severe, prolonged, physically agonizing illnesses.
Right. We are talking about the kind of 17th century chronic suffering that just entirely consumes a person's existence.
And, if a friend is in that situation today, our modern instinct is to offer standard condolences.
Of course.
We hope for a cure. We offer to help with daily tasks, maybe bring them a meal. But Lawrence completely bypasses all of that.
He really does. He delivers this perspective on pain and joy and the presence of the divine that just completely upends our fundamental understanding of human suffering.
So our mission today is to figure out, how does a person reach a state where they claim physical agony is actually a form of spiritual paradise?
But before we deconstruct his philosophy, we really have to clarify our framework here for a second.
Yes, very important.
Because these sources contain intense, absolute religious doctrines. And that includes explicit advice against seeking medical treatment.
Right.
So we just want to be clear that our objective today is not to endorse these religious views, nor are we, validating his medical advice.
Definitely not telling anyone to skip the doctor.
Exactly. We are analyzing Lawrence's worldview impartially. We're really just treating this text as a historical and psychological artifact.
Just to understand the extreme lengths to which the human mind can really reframe its own reality.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's start with the 13th letter, where he makes a claim that honestly sounds biologically impossible.
It really does.
He asserts that maintaining a habit of being with the divine significantly reduces physical illness.
Yeah.
And he goes so far as to boldly question how anyone who fully loves God and resides in his presence could even feel physical pain.
Which is a massive statement.
Huge. He's looking at his own experience, claiming he sees the whole world suffering while he is exceptionally, overwhelmingly joyful.
Even though he believes he deserves the cruelest punishments.
Right. So help me understand how he separates physical sensation from spiritual reality. I mean, is he claiming his nervous system just shuts down?
Well, what's fascinating here is he's claiming a fundamental severing of nociception from suffering.
Nociception being the actual physical nerve signals.
Exactly. But to understand the mechanics of this habit he's talking about, we have to shed our modern definition of the word.
Because today a habit is just like brushing your teeth.
Right. It's mindless.
Yep.
Taking a familiar commute, tying your shoes. But in Lawrence's 17th century theology, a habit is a continuous, violently active psychological practice.
Wow, violently active.
He is basically talking about a cognitive hijacking. So in modern neurobiological terms, pain has two main components.
Okay.
There is the sensory discriminative aspect. That's the somatosensory cortex registering that tissue is damaged. That's nociception.
The physical alarm bell.
Right. And then there is the affective motivational aspect, which is processed in areas like the anterior cingulate cortex. And that is the emotional experience of suffering because of that damage.
So he's not saying the tissue isn't damaged. He's saying the emotional translation of that damage is being, entirely overwritten.
Precisely. The nervous system's warning lights are absolutely flashing, but the mind's interpretation of those lights has been reprogrammed.
That is wild.
He acknowledges that God allows suffering to purify individuals, sure, but he argues the subjective emotional terror of that suffering is mitigated by absolute focus.
Right, the terror of it.
He literally writes, I really do not understand how a person who loves God with all their heart and is with God can feel pain.
I try to relate this to something tangible, like extreme endurance athletes.
Okay.
Like, imagine an ultramarathoner running 100 miles through Death Valley. They hit mile 80, and their muscles are experiencing massive microtears.
The lactic acid is agonizing.
Right. Their biology is screaming at them to stop.
Yeah.
But they don't experience that nociception as an existential threat. They reframe the burning as progress.
Yes.
The pain just means they are closer to the finish line. So is Lawrence utilizing a similar cognitive framework, just applied to a cosmic spiritual metric instead of a physical finish line?
The mechanism is definitely similar, but the stakes and the timeline are vastly different.
How so?
Well, the athlete's reframing is temporary, right?
Yeah.
And it's end-goal-oriented. The race will eventually end.
True. They get to go home and ice their knees.
Exactly. Lawrence's finish line is a perpetual state of unbroken communion. He tells his sick friend to take courage, give all sorrows to God, and ask for strength to endure.
So there is no resting period.
None. He is demanding a continuous reframing of the pain as an opportunity to practice fellowship. The cognitive load required to maintain that state without a literal finish line in sight is just staggering.
It sounds exhausting. And I'm also getting really hung up on the psychological paradox he sets up in this same letter.
The unworthiness part.
Yes. He claims he is enjoying this massive, uncontainable joy, but in the exact same breath, he states he deserves the most cruel punishments.
It's a stark contrast.
Utter worthlessness and euphoric joy. How does a human mind hold both of those opposing realities without just completely fracturing?
Well, it only fractures if the joy relies on self-worth.
Oh.
In the mystic framework, the darker the self-perception, the brighter the grace appears.
So they feed each other.
Exactly. If you genuinely believe you are completely corrupt and deserve profound cruelty, yet you are currently experiencing the subjective warmth of divine presence, the relief is magnified exponentially.
That makes a strange sort of sense.
The cognitive dissonance resolves itself through this concept of unmerited mercy. His joy is entirely externalized.
But see, externalizing your entire psychological stability like that, it creates a terrifying vulnerability, doesn't it? Because if his focus slips, what happens? He actually admits in the text that if the divine left him for even a moment, he would become the most corrupt person among all the living.
Which exposes the immense fragility of his mental architecture.
It's a house of cards.
His resilience is completely contingent on this unbroken connection. The moment he looks inward at himself or purely at his physical deterioration, he risks plummeting into absolute despair.
Yeah.
He writes, "Let us tremble not to leave him." And that word, tremble, it indicates a deep existential terror of losing this cognitive lock.
It sounds utterly exhausting to maintain. I mean, it's a beautiful state to describe on paper, but maintaining hypervigilance over your own mind minute by minute, it's no wonder he calls it a difficult habit to form.
It requires Olympic-level discipline.
And, it's really easy for him to preach this from a state of euphoric joy. He even asks God to share some of his sick friend's pain with him.
It reads almost like survivor's guilt, doesn't it?
Totally.
Yeah.
But taking this lofty mysticism and handing it to someone who is actively feverish, vomiting, and trapped in physical agony, that really transitions us into the 14th letter.
Right, where things get significantly more intense.
Because his philosophy shifts from this passive endurance to an active and, frankly, dangerous rebellion against physical reality.
Yes. Letter 14, written on November 28, 1690, is the crucible of his practical application.
Right.
He tells this chronically ill individual that their prolonged sickness is a mark or a proof of God's love.
And here's where it gets really interesting, but also a bit alarming. To a modern ear, that sounds deeply manipulative.
Or at least highly irresponsible.
Exactly. Because if sickness is a proof of love, then you are incentivized to remain sick. And he explicitly advises his friend to stop taking medicine.
He does.
He says, in my opinion, it is best for you to stop taking medicine and simply rely entirely on God. He even argues that physical nursing and medicine might actually worsen the illness.
It's a jarring statement.
Help me understand the justification here. Telling a dying person to refuse medical treatment, how does he rationalize that?
We have to reconstruct the 17th century theological worldview for a second. In that context, the physical body is viewed as deeply secondary and often actively antagonistic to the eternal soul.
Okay. So if the soul is suffering from a spiritual sickness, say pride, distraction, a lack of faith, God uses the physical body's suffering as a surgical tool.
To perform a spiritual operation.
Precisely. So the illness isn't a random tragedy. It's a prescribed treatment plan.
Wow. So to rely on earthly medicine is to actively fight against the spiritual medicine God is trying to administer.
Exactly. And Lawrence anticipates the pushback. He knows this sounds reckless.
He has to.
He writes, "This is not tempting God." He reframes the refusal of medicine from an act of suicidal recklessness into the ultimate act of surrender to the, quote, only physician.
It reminds me of a modern intervention.
How so?
Think of a friend who is heavily intoxicated and trying to drive. You physically take their car keys away because they are unfit to navigate the road.
Right, to protect them.
You are saving them from physical destruction.
Oh.
Lawrence is essentially telling his friend to let the divine take the wheel entirely.
And if a car crashes, if the physical body deteriorates and dies, that is a perfectly acceptable outcome because the soul was in the passenger seat.
That's a great way to put it.
The physical destruction is just the airbag deploying to ensure the eternal spirit survives the impact.
The analogy definitely holds up mechanically within his theology, but we also have to consider the historical irony here, which is fascinating.
Oh, the actual state of medicine in 1690.
Exactly. European medicine at that time was heavily reliant on humorism.
Leeches and bleeding.
Bloodletting, aggressive purging, administering toxic heavy metals like antimony.
Basically just poisoning people.
The medical treatments of his day were often brutally painful and actively accelerated death. So, while Lawrence's advice is entirely theological...
From a purely empirical standpoint, he might have been right.
Yes. Refusing a 17th century doctor might have genuinely spared the patient a significant amount of medically induced agony.
That is such a wild historical blind spot. He thinks he's rejecting medicine for spiritual purity, but he might actually be accidentally extending his friend's life.
Or at least vastly improving the quality of it by keeping the bloodletters out of the room.
Right. But regardless of the medical efficacy of the 1690s, the psychological framing here is what's truly staggering to me.
The reframing of the suffering itself.
Yeah, by telling his friend that this pain is a bespoke intervention from an omniscient creator, he is providing this massive psychological armor against nihilism.
And nihilism is the ultimate psychological threat when it comes to chronic illness.
It really is.
If human beings believe their suffering is random, just a meaningless genetic lottery or some stray pathogen, it is psychologically devastating.
You're just suffering for no reason.
But Lawrence's radical prescription transforms the universe from a chaotic void into a heavily curated, intentional space.
Right, a space where everything happens for a reason.
If your pain is lovingly administered for your ultimate eternal benefit, the dread of meaninglessness just evaporates. He famously writes, "Love makes bitterness sweet."
And that airtight logical loop is so brilliant in its defensibility, because the worse the pain gets, the more God is working on your soul.
Which proves God loves you more.
Which should make you even more joyful. No amount of physical deterioration can disprove the faith. It only validates the premise further.
It's structurally flawless from the inside.
But, actually operationalizing love makes bitterness sweet is a completely different story.
Oh, absolutely.
How does a person actually get through Tuesday afternoon in unendurable pain? And in his 15th letter, he shifts from the theory of suffering to the actual mechanics of enduring it.
Right. Letter 15 is the architectural blueprint for survival.
Yes.
He notes that he himself was recently near death, and he claims he was incredibly happy during the experience. He didn't pray for healing, only for the strength to endure gently.
He's modeling the behavior first.
Exactly. But then he introduces the core mechanism, which is this concept of the spiritual temple.
Right, the temple.
He writes, "We should always use humility and love to commune with him and not let our spirit wander outside. We should make our hearts a spiritual temple where we worship him continuously."
That spatial metaphor is so critical. He's talking about defining a really strict boundary.
A wall.
Right. The instruction is to aggressively prevent the spirit from wandering outside. And outside, in the context of chronic illness, is literally the entirety of objective physical reality.
But it's the decaying body, the anxiety about the future.
The sheer sensory overload of the sickbed. He is advocating for a radical internal retreat into a walled garden inside the mind.
It requires an absolute severing of attention from the external world. He instructs that whatever displeases this divine presence, we just do not do, say, or even think.
Think of putting on a pair of high-end, active noise-canceling headphones in the middle of a chaotic, screaming crowd.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right, because the external world of the sickbed is deafening, Pain signals, fear, the doctors. The spiritual temple is the internal acoustic seal of those headphones.
Okay, yeah.
When you activate them, they emit a counter frequency that neutralizes the external chaos, allowing you to focus entirely on a singular, calming audio track.
You're tuning it all out.
You are still physically sitting in the chaotic room, but your experiential reality is entirely insulated within that acoustic boundary.
But the mechanical reality of that analogy, which makes it so fitting, is that active noise cancellation requires continuous power.
It drains a battery.
Exactly. Maintaining that acoustic seal against the violent noise of a failing physical body requires an unrelenting energy output.
It has to be exhausting.
And Lawrence is starkly honest about this cognitive drain. He writes, "I know that it is very hard to reach this state at first because it requires pure, single-minded faith."
He isn't selling a cheap magic trick.
Not at all. He is demanding an Olympian level of mental discipline to train the mind not to react to the body.
And his promised reward for this grueling psychological effort, it completely upends traditional religious expectations, doesn't it?
It really does.
Because we generally understand paradise, especially in this historical theology, as a post-death destination.
The reward granted after you endure the valley of tears.
Exactly. But Lawrence takes paradise and he relocates it entirely. He says, suffering with him is paradise. We can already enjoy the rest of paradise in this life.
This is a monumental epistemological shift. Heaven is no longer a geographic location you travel to upon death.
Right.
It is a present moment internal cognitive state achieved through psychological alignment with the divine.
Which completely strips external circumstances of their power.
Completely. If paradise is an internal state, then a physically healthy monarch who is disconnected from this divine presence is living in hell.
While a dying man who has fortified his inner spiritual temple is currently residing in paradise, it completely democratizes ultimate peace.
But the battery powering those noise-canceling headphones, as you called them, is pure faith.
Right.
What happens when the initial euphoria fades? How do you sustain that acoustic seal when the sheer attrition of chronic illness wears you down day after day?
It's a major vulnerability. And he naturally anticipates this, which leads us to his 16th letter. This is his final theological thesis, written just weeks before his death.
Letter 16, dated January 2010, 1691. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it operates as his grand summation.
Yeah.
He begins with a profound declaration of radical acceptance. He writes, "God knows our needs best. Everything he does is for our good."
If you genuinely accept that, the suffering loses its bitterness.
Exactly. But then he introduces a fascinating formula for maintaining that spiritual temple. He essentially provides a calculus of faith.
Do equation.
He writes, "The degree to which we love God is directly proportional to the degree to which we know him."
I want to unpack the weight of that equation. Love equals knowledge.
Right.
He is arguing that blind, unexamined faith is structurally insufficient to withstand the reality of extreme pain.
It's too weak. It implies an active, rigorous investigation of the divine. You cannot sustain that internal acoustic seal on vague theological concepts.
Or emotional hype.
Exactly. True. Enduring love, the kind capable of overriding physical massiception, requires deep experiential knowledge of the object of that love.
He says the deeper and more you know him, the deeper and more your heart will love him.
But this marks a massive pivot from his earlier writings, doesn't it?
It really does. In letter 13, he was praising his own uncontainable euphoric joy. He seems so focused on how amazing it felt.
Yes.
But here in letter 16, he explicitly warns against chasing that exact feeling. He writes, "Never seeing God or love God because of a happy feeling. No matter how good that feeling is, it can never lead us closer to God like simple faith can."
It's a complete 180.
Why does he suddenly condemn the very joy he was boasting about just a few weeks prior?
Because he recognizes the biological volatility of human emotion. Happy feelings, even profound spiritual ones, are fundamentally tied to neurochemistry.
Dopamine, serotonin, endorphins.
Exactly. In a state of chronic terminal illness, the body's ability to produce those chemicals will eventually fail.
It has to.
If you build the foundation of your spiritual temple on the expectation of emotional euphoria, the entire structure will collapse the moment the physical pain overwhelms your endorphins.
Wow.
He is warning against becoming addicted to the spiritual dopamine hit.
He's pushing for a cold, unyielding commitment to the reality of the divine presence, completely divorced from subjective mood.
Because simple faith remains intact, whether you feel euphoric or entirely numb.
Right, but he identifies one specific threat to this simple faith that I find just hauntingly relevant to a modern even secular audience today.
The distraction piece.
Yes, he warns about the danger of our attention being fractured. He says, we are truly blameworthy because we are often busy with trivial things and put him aside.
The identification of trivial things as the ultimate spiritual offense, it's a timeless diagnosis of the human condition.
It really is.
Distraction is the greatest enemy of the internal temple. He issues a stark warning. Although he is patient today, one day we must pay a heavy price.
So what does this all mean for us now? Draw a parallel to the modern attention economy.
Okay.
Our attention is the most aggressively commodified resource on the planet right now.
Without a doubt.
We are constantly externally focused. We're doom scrolling, reacting to petty online outrage, obsessing over status symbols.
Well, getting lost in the noise.
Exactly. These are the exact trivial things Lawrence is condemning.
And the heavy price he mentions is the ultimate opportunity cost of a superficial life.
Woof.
If you spend decades letting your consciousness be fractured by trivial external stimuli, you fail to build the internal psychological architecture required to withstand true suffering.
Because you never practice focusing on anything deeper.
Exactly. When terminal illness, profound grief, or disaster inevitably strikes, if your attention has only ever lived on the surface of things, your inner temple will be non-existent.
The storm will simply wash you away.
His plea to put other things aside is a desperate call for radical prioritization before the crisis actually arrives.
And the gravity of that warning is magnified entirely by the timeline of these documents.
It's chilling.
He writes his plea for rigorous focus on January 22nd. At the end of the letter, he states, I deeply hope that by his mercy, I can go to see him within a few days.
And the text features a final bracketed postscript that reads, on February 6, 1691, he laid down, and within a week, he returned to his heavenly home.
2 weeks. 2 weeks after he drafts the Calculus of Faith, warns against spiritual dopamine, and begs his friend to ignore trivialities, he literally goes to bed and dies.
It proves the absolute, unshakable integrity of the text.
It gives me chills. This wasn't a philosopher in a comfortable academy theorizing about endurance in the abstract.
No.
Lawrence was standing on the precipice of his own mortality. He felt his organs shutting down, he looked death in the eye, and he maintained his cognitive lock on the divine to his literal last breath.
It demands an immense level of respect for the text, regardless of your personal theological stance.
Completely.
You can vehemently disagree with his rejection of medicine, you can find his concept of self-worth alarming, but his authenticity is bulletproof.
Right.
He stress-tested the architecture of his spiritual temple against the ultimate biological adversary, and the structure held. He lived the philosophy until the moment his consciousness ceased.
It provides such a solemn, undeniable weight to this entire analysis. Let's look back at the sheer scale of the psychological terrain we've covered today.
We covered a lot of ground.
We started with the extreme paradox of Letter 13, the claim that a violent, active habit of the mind could intercept and override the emotional suffering of physical pain.
Producing uncontainable joy even amidst feelings of utter unworthiness.
Right. We then examined the terrifying practical application in Letter 14,
where Lawrence rejects earthly medicine entirely.
Choosing to frame physical deterioration not as a tragedy, but as a bespoke surgical intervention designed by a loving creator to cure the soul.
And then we broke down the mechanics of surviving that unmedicated reality in Letter 15.
Through the construction of the inner spiritual temple, the absolute necessity of keeping the spirit from wandering into the chaos of the external world.
And the radical redefinition of paradise as a present-moment cognitive state rather than a post-death destination.
And we concluded with his final thesis in Letter 16, the epistemological equation that love requires deep knowledge.
The stern warning against building a worldview on fleeting emotional highs.
And the tragic cost of allowing our attention to be consumed by trivialities, leading right up to his final fatal days.
It's an incredible arc.
So, as we step back from 1691 and look at our own lives, Lawrence's letters throw a massive, unavoidable gauntlet at our feet.
They really do.
Whether you are a person of deep religious conviction or a strict materialist, the challenge remains identical for you. How do you frame your own suffering?
Because it's coming for all of us.
When you face the inevitable hardships of human existence, a devastating physical illness, the collapse of a career, a profound personal betrayal, Do you view it purely as a random, meaningless tragedy that renders you a helpless victim?
Or can you find a mechanism, even a secular one, to build an internal architecture that extracts meaning, resilience, or some sliver of purpose from the most agonizing parts of your reality?
These historical extremes really expand the boundaries of what we understand to be psychologically possible.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over regarding Lawrence's equation of faith.
Please do.
He argued that our capacity to love something, to truly find peace within it, is exactly proportional to how deeply we know it.
Right.
If you find yourself entirely unable to accept your current circumstances, if you are restless and suffocating in your own life, is it possible that you simply haven't done the rigorous work to understand the reality of your situation yet?
That's a tough question.
What are the trivial things in your daily routine? The endless scrolls, the petty resentments, the superficial distractions that you are allowing to siphon off the mental energy you desperately need to build your own inner sanctuary.
Because eventually, the clean binary X-rays we talked about at the beginning of this journey are going to fail.
They always do.
The diagnostic machines of modern life will break down, the easy answers will evaporate, and when the external world offers absolutely no comfort or cure, the only thing you will have left to rely on is the strength of the temple you've managed to build inside your own mind. Thank you for joining us on this intense deep dive. We appreciate your curiosity and your willingness to explore the messy, profound, and often shocking depths of human endurance with us. Keep questioning, keep learning.
For more spiritual resources, visit lokaken.ai.